Commander's mandibles clicked with barely concealed irritation as he reviewed the intelligence reports flowing across his command console. The bridge of the hegemony battlecruiser Eternal Dominion hummed with activity as his crew prepared for what should have been a routine subjugation mission. Around him, officers from a dozen different species worked with practiced efficiency, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and electronic pulses that had become as familiar to him as his own breathing. The target this time was a species that called itself humanity from a small blue world they named Earth. The preliminary reports painted a picture so pathetic that it initially wondered if the intelligence division had made an error. According to their scouts, these humans had only recently developed faster-than-light travel, barely qualifying them for recognition by the galactic hegemony. Their technology was primitive, their military forces scattered and uncoordinated, and their political structure fragmented into hundreds of competing nation-states. "Sir," his communications officer, a tall, crystalline being named OK, chimed from her station. "We're receiving a transmission from the human. They're requesting a diplomatic meeting." Secondary arms twitched in what his species considered amusement. The idea of these newcomers thinking they could negotiate with the hegemony was almost charming in its naivety. The hegemony had been the dominant force in this galaxy for over 50,000 years, having absorbed or destroyed countless civilizations. What could these barely spacefaring primitives possibly offer? "Put it through," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had overseen the conquest of 17 star systems. The main flickered to life, revealing a human female with graying hair and wearing what appeared to be some form of military uniform. Her species was remarkably unremarkable bipedal mammals with no obvious natural weapons, no protective carapaces, and no visible technological implants. They looked almost comically vulnerable. "I am Admiral Sarah of the United Earth Defense Fleet," the human began, her voice steady despite what must have been overwhelming fear. "We understand you represent the galactic hegemony, and we request the opportunity for peaceful dialogue." Leaned back in his command throne, his four eyes studying the primitive before him. "I am commander of the hegemony 3rd Conquest Fleet. There will be no dialogue. Your species has two choices: immediate surrender and integration into the hegemony as a servile class or total annihilation. You have 72 of your hours to decide." The human's expression didn't change, which found mildly interesting. Most species showed clear signs of terror at this point in the conversation. "Commander, we've reviewed your terms and we must respectfully decline. However, we would like to propose an alternative arrangement." This time, mandibles clicked with genuine amusement. Several of his bridge crew made sounds that indicated they shared his entertainment. "Alternative arrangement. Child, your entire civilization has existed for less time than some of my officers have been alive. Your technology is barely beyond primitive combustion engines and chemical propellants. What could you possibly offer the hegemony?" Admiral's lips curved slightly in what had learned was called a smile. For some reason, this expression made him feel oddly uncomfortable. "We offer you the chance to learn something new, Commander. You see, we've spent some time studying your military doctrines and conquest patterns. Very impressive, very efficient. But we think you might find our approach educational." The bridge fell silent except for the constant hum of the ship's systems. His primary arms crossed over his armored chest, while his secondary arms operated his console, bringing up tactical displays of the human fleet. What he saw only reinforced his assessment of their primitiveness. Their ships were crude, boxy affairs that seemed to prioritize function over form. Their weapons appeared to be kinetic projectiles and simple energy beams. Their formations showed no understanding of three-dimensional space combat. "Educational," repeated the word slowly. "You wish to educate the hegemony, a power that has conquered worlds before your species learned to make fire." "Actually, Commander, we've been making fire for quite a while now," Admiral replied with that same unsettling smile. "We've gotten pretty good at it, but that's not what we want to teach you. We want to show you what we've learned about war." This statement drew actual laughter from several bridge officers. War? These creatures wanted to teach the hegemony about war. The hegemony had perfected warfare across 1,000 different environments, against species with every conceivable advantage. They had fought beings who could manipulate gravity with their minds, aquatic species that could survive in the vacuum of space, hive minds that coordinated perfectly across vast distances. and these soft, weak mammals thought they had something to offer. "Your time begins now," declared, cutting the transmission with a gesture. The return to showing the blue-white marble of Earth hanging in the void, surrounded by what the humans generously called a defense fleet. Intelligence officer, a being with compound eyes that could process multiple data streams simultaneously, approached command throne. "Sir, shall I begin deployment of our standard conquest protocol?" Nodded absently, his attention already turning to other matters. The standard protocol was elegant in its simplicity and had never failed. A demonstration of overwhelming force, followed by systematic destruction of military assets, then bombardment of population centers until surrender was inevitable. It typically took less than a planetary rotation to complete. Deploy the first and second battle groups to the outer system. Begin long-range bombardment of their orbital installations. Standard intimidation patterns. Once their defenses crumble, we'll demand surrender again. If they refuse, his mandibles spread in what passed for a grin among his kind. The Eternal Dominion and her escort fleet moved into position with practiced precision. Watched with satisfaction as his ships took their positions, their weapon systems charging for the demonstration that would surely break whatever pathetic morale these humans possessed. His fleet consisted of 47 capital ships, each one capable of sterilizing a continent, supported by hundreds of smaller vessels designed for specific tactical roles. As the first barrage of plasma bolts streaked toward the human orbital stations, expected to see the typical pattern of destruction and panic. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The human stations didn't attempt to evade or raise shields. They simply disappeared. "Tactical report," snapped, his good humor evaporating. "Unknown, sir," came the reply from his tactical officer, a multi-tentacled being whose neural processing speed was among the fastest in the known galaxy. "The stations appear to have utilized some form of instantaneous translocation technology. Our sensors are detecting massive quantum fluctuations throughout the system." Instantaneous translocation. His mind raced through the implications. The hegemony had been working on similar technology for without success. The energy requirements alone should have been beyond any civilization this young. "Sir," the communications officer's voice carried an unusual urgency. "Multiple contacts appearing throughout the system. There. Everywhere." The tactical display erupted with new contacts. What had been a handful of primitive human vessels suddenly became thousands. Ships appeared behind, above, below, and among his fleet formations with impossible precision. Not only that, but the designs were completely different from what their intelligence had reported. These vessels were sleek, predatory things that seemed to bend light around their hulls. "How?" demanded. "Our intelligence indicated they possessed fewer than 200 vessels total." "Incoming transmission from the human fleet," announced the communications officer. Admiral's face reappeared on the screen, but now she was clearly aboard one of these new vessels. The bridge behind her was clean, efficient, and featured technology that couldn't immediately identify. "Hello again, Commander," she said pleasantly. "I hope you don't mind, but we took the liberty of repositioning some of our assets while we were talking. We thought it might make for a more interesting demonstration." His tactical mind was already analyzing the new situation. His fleet was now completely surrounded, with human vessels occupying every tactical advantage position. But that should have been impossible. Their technology. "Your intelligence was quite accurate, by the way," Admiral continued as if reading his thoughts. "We do only have about 200 vessels. What your scouts missed was that we don't really think about space combat the same way you do." "Explain yourself," growled, though part of him was beginning to suspect he might not like the explanation. "Well, you see, when you've only been in space for a relatively short time, you don't have the luxury of developing hundreds of different ship classes for specific roles. You have to get creative. So we asked ourselves, what if a ship didn't have to be just one thing?" As she spoke, watched in growing alarm as the human vessels began to change. What had appeared to be destroyers suddenly unfolded into massive battleships. Escort craft merged together to form carriers that began launching swarms of fighters that materialized from seemingly empty space. "Modular construction," Admiral explained helpfully. "When you think about it, most of a ship's mass is just empty space and structural supports. We decided that was wasteful. Every component of our vessels can reconfigure based on tactical needs. A single ship can function as a destroyer, a battleship, a carrier, or a science vessel depending on what the situation requires. The implications hit like a physical blow. If human ships could reconfigure their function in real time, then traditional tactical analysis became meaningless. How could you plan an engagement when you didn't know what type of ships you were facing? "That's not possible," he said, though even as the words left his mouth, he was watching it happen before his eyes. "You're right, it shouldn't be," Admiral agreed. "At least not with conventional technology, but we told you we wanted to teach you something about war, didn't we? The first lesson is this: when you're outnumbered and you don't fight fair." The human fleet began to move, and their tactics were unlike anything in extensive experience. Instead of the traditional formations and predictable maneuvers he expected, the human ship seemed to dance through space in patterns that conventional three-dimensional thinking. Ships would vanish from one location and reappear in another, not through translocation technology, but by folding space around themselves. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, voice tight with stress, "their vessels appear to be utilizing localized space-time manipulation. They're not moving faster than light, they're compressing the space between their origin and destination points." Space-time manipulation. The hegemony had theoretical knowledge of such techniques, but they required energy expenditures beyond the capacity of any known power source. Yet these humans, these primitives who had supposedly only recently achieved interstellar flight, were using it as casually as the hegemony used conventional thrusters. "Begin evasive maneuvers," ordered, though he suspected it might already be too late. "All weapons target the nearest human vessels and fire at will." The hegemony fleet's response was immediate and devastating. Plasma cannons, quantum torpedoes, and antimatter beams filled the space between the two fleets with destructive energy. Any conventional fleet would have been vaporized instantly by such overwhelming firepower, but the human ships didn't behave conventionally. Instead of raising shields or attempting to evade, the human vessels seemed to absorb the incoming fire. Not deflect it, not disperse it, but actually absorb it and redirect it. The energy from weapons fire began to form a glowing network between the human ships, creating what looked almost like a vast web of collected energy. "Energy absorption and redistribution," Admiral's voice came through the communications channel with what sounded like pride. "Another thing we learned from being the new kids in the galaxy. When everyone has bigger guns than you do, you learn to turn those guns into advantages." The collected energy suddenly discharged in a coordinated pulse that swept across fleet. But instead of the destructive blast he expected, the energy pulse seemed to simply shut things off. Weapons systems went offline, shields flickered and died, engines fell silent. Ship after ship in his fleet went dark, not destroyed but completely disabled. "How?" whispered, staring at his darkened tactical displays. His ship was still functional, but barely. Only essential life support and communications remained active. "EMP cascade tuned to your specific technology signatures," Admiral explained with that infuriating calm. "We've been studying hegemony technology through your reconnaissance missions for several years now. Once you understand the underlying principles of how someone's technology works, it's remarkably easy to develop countermeasures." Several years? His mind reeled. If the humans had been tracking hegemony scouts for years without being detected, then their sensor technology was far more advanced than anyone had suspected. But that raised another question. If you possess this level of technology, why allow our scouts to gather intelligence on your capabilities? Why present yourself as primitive? Admiral's smile returned, and this time recognized it for what it was, the expression of a predator that had been patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Because, Commander, the second lesson we wanted to teach you about war is this: the greatest weapon is not superior firepower or advanced technology. The greatest weapon is making your enemy underestimate you." As if summoned by her words, new contacts began appearing on barely functional sensors. But these weren't ships. They were structures. Massive installations that had been hidden throughout the system, concealed by the same technology that had allowed the human fleet to appear and disappear at will. "Meet Earth's actual defense grid," Admiral said as the installations came online. "What you've been fighting so far was just our mobile fleet. We built the real defenses into the system itself." The installations were vast beyond anything had ever seen. Each one dwarfed his largest battleships and bristled with weapons that seemed to bend the very laws of physics. But more disturbing than their size was their number. Hundreds of them materialized throughout the solar system, turning what had seemed like a simple conquest into a fortress that could have challenged the entire hegemony fleet. "This is impossible," breathed. "The energy requirements alone, your civilization couldn't possibly support construction on this scale." "You're thinking like someone who's been in space for 50,000 years," Admiral replied. "You've grown comfortable with certain assumptions about how things work, but we're new to this. We don't know what's supposed to be impossible, so we found ways to make it possible." She gestured, and new information began flowing to disabled ships. Technical specifications, power output readings, construction techniques that violated everything the hegemony thought they knew about engineering and physics. "Fusion isn't our primary power source, Commander. It's our backup. We've learned to tap into zero-point energy, the quantum fluctuations that exist even in empty space. Once you crack that particular problem, energy becomes essentially unlimited." Zero-point energy, the theoretical holy grail of power generation that the hegemony's greatest minds had declared impossible to harness. Yet here were these supposed primitives using it to power defensive installations that could threaten entire fleets. "How long?" asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How long have you been deceiving us?" "We weren't deceiving you exactly," Admiral said thoughtfully. "We really were as primitive as your scouts reported when you first found us. But you made a crucial mistake, Commander. You assumed that because we were young, we were also slow to learn." New data flowed across screens, showing a timeline that made his blood run cold. The first hegemony scout had made contact with humanity just 15 years ago. In that impossibly short span of time, these creatures had somehow advanced their technology by 15 years, he said in disbelief. "You achieved all of this in 15 years. "We're very motivated learners," Admiral replied with what was beginning to realize was a terrifying understatement. "When you discover that you're alone in a galaxy full of civilizations that could wipe you out without effort, you tend to focus your educational efforts." The implications were staggering. If humanity could advance this rapidly, what would they be capable of in another 15 years? In 50? In 100? The hegemony had grown complacent over its long dominance, innovating slowly and gradually. But these humans seemed to approach technological development like they were racing against time itself. "The third lesson," Admiral continued, "is that experience can be a disadvantage. The hegemony has conquered so many civilizations that you've developed patterns, standard procedures, expected responses. But we don't have any experience being conquered, so we didn't know we were supposed to surrender when a superior force arrived." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a note of something that made exoskeleton tingle with primal fear. "We only know how to fight." The disabled hegemony fleet hung helplessly in space, surrounded by human vessels and defensive installations that represented a technological leap that should have been impossible. But as stared at the displays showing the true extent of humanity's capabilities, he began to understand that impossible might be a concept these creatures simply didn't recognize. "What do you want?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Admiral's smile widened, revealing small white teeth that suddenly seemed far more predatory than they had any right to be. "We want you to go back to the hegemony, Commander. We want you to tell them exactly what happened here. Every detail, every impossible technology, every assumption you made that turned out to be wrong." She leaned forward slightly, and her next words carried the weight of absolute certainty. "And then we want you to tell them that humanity sends its regards, and that we'll be in touch very soon to discuss the future of galactic politics." As crippled fleet limped away from the Sol system, carrying news that would shake the very foundations of the galactic hegemony, he couldn't help but wonder if they had just encountered the end of their 50,000-year reign. These humans had turned every assumption about warfare, technology, and civilization on its head in the span of a single engagement. But as terrifying as that thought was, another realization chilled him even more. If humanity could accomplish this much while pretending to be primitive, what were they capable of when they stopped pretending altogether? The question would haunt him for the remainder of his journey back to hegemony space, where he would have to find a way to explain to his superiors that the galaxy's civilization might also be its most dangerous. The High Council chamber of the galactic hegemony had witnessed many momentous events over its 50 of existence, but never had its crystalline walls echoed with such stunned silence. Grand Hierarch, whose species had evolved from apex predators on a world of perpetual storms, sat motionless on the central throne that had been carved from a single massive gemstone. Around him, the representatives of the 17 founding species of the hegemony maintained their own frozen poses of disbelief. Commander stood in the center of the chamber's focus platform, his four arms spread in the traditional gesture of complete honesty, while holographic displays showed the impossible data his fleet had recorded during their encounter with humanity. The readings seemed to mock everything the hegemony believed about technological development, military doctrine, and the natural order of galactic civilization. "Repeat your assessment of their capabilities," Grand Hierarch commanded, his voice creating harmonic vibrations that resonated through the chamber's acoustic design. When the Grand Hierarch spoke, every being present felt the words as much as heard them. His mandibles clicked nervously. He had delivered this report 17 times to various levels of command during his journey back to the hegemony capital, and each telling made it sound more unbelievable, even to himself. Zero-point energy manipulation on an industrial scale, localized space-time compression for tactical mobility, real-time matter reorganization at the molecular level, and energy absorption matrices that can redirect our most powerful weapons, he recited mechanically. Their defensive installations demonstrate construction techniques that violate our understanding of structural engineering, and their fleet coordination suggests a level of quantum entanglement communication that we have deemed theoretically impossible. Council member, or a crystalline being whose species had mastered energy manipulation for 30,000 years, leaned forward with obvious skepticism. "You expect us to believe that a species that achieved interstellar flight 15 years ago has surpassed technologies that have taken us to even approach?" "I expect nothing, Council member," replied formally. "I report only what my sensors recorded and what my eyes witnessed. Every byte of data has been through 17 separate analysis protocols. The recordings are accurate." Grand Hierarch's 6 eyes focused with laser intensity on the holographic displays. The data was indeed checked and rechecked by the hegemony's most advanced analytical systems. But accepting its accuracy meant accepting that everything they thought they knew about technological development was fundamentally flawed. "Strategic Assessment Council," the Grand Hierarch intoned, "present your analysis." Fleet Admiral Eth, whose cybernetic implants connected him directly to the hegemony's vast military databases, stepped forward. His species had been one of the first to join the hegemony voluntarily after witnessing their power, and his strategic mind had planned countless successful conquests. "If we accept Commander's data as accurate," he began, his artificial voice carrying none of the uncertainty that his biological officers might have expressed, "we face a paradigm shift that threatens the fundamental assumptions upon which our military supremacy rests." The chamber filled with the various sounds that different species made when experiencing stress. Clicks, whistles, harmonic resonances, and electromagnetic fluctuations created a symphony of unease. "Elaborate," commanded the Grand Hierarch. "Our conquest strategy relies on technological superiority, overwhelming force, and the predictable response patterns of civilizations that have developed along traditional evolutionary paths," Admiral Eth continued. "These humans appear to have bypassed traditional development entirely. They have achieved in 15 years what typically requires several." Council member, whose aquatic species communicated through complex bioluminescent patterns, pulsed a question into the chamber's translation matrix. "What is your assessment of their true technological level?" "Unknown," Admiral Eth admitted with what would have been reluctance if his emotional centers hadn't been replaced with computational matrices. "Their technology demonstrates characteristics that suggest they may be more advanced than we are in specific areas, while simultaneously showing evidence of recent development. It is paradoxical." Grand Hierarch's secondary arms operated his personal command interface, calling up files that had been classified at the highest levels for decades. "Intelligence Division, report on any anomalous activities in human space over the past 15 years. Intelligence Director materialized in the chamber through a personal transport field. Her species existed partially in normal space and partially in quantum dimensions, making them ideal for gathering information without detection. Grand Hierarch, our surveillance of the Sol system has recorded unusual quantum signatures consistent with large-scale reality manipulation, she began, her form flickering between visible and translucent. However, until Commander's encounter, we attributed these readings to natural phenomena. Natural phenomena. The Grand Hierarch's voice carried a harmonic that indicated dangerous levels of displeasure. The humans appear to be utilizing technologies that our sensors cannot properly categorize, Director continued. They manipulate space-time as casually as we manipulate matter. They harvest energy from quantum fluctuations as easily as we collect light from stars. Most disturbing, they seem to be able to alter the fundamental constants of physics within localized areas. The chamber erupted in cacophony as every species present expressed shock in their own way. Altering physical constants was purely theoretical, requiring energies comparable to stellar formation. The idea that any civilization could achieve such capabilities, let alone one barely out of their home system, challenged the basic understanding of what was possible. Order, commanded the Grand Hierarch, and his harmonic voice cut through the noise like a blade. What is the Intelligence Division's assessment of human intentions? Director's form as she accessed her quantum memory matrices. Unknown, but concerning. Our analysis of their communication patterns suggests they view the hegemony not as a superior force to be respected or feared, but as an obstacle to be removed. An obstacle? Council member Or's crystalline structure rang with indignation. We have dominated this galaxy for 50,000 years. We have absorbed or destroyed thousands of civilizations. How can these primitives view us as merely an obstacle? Because, Director replied with the cold certainty of someone reporting facts rather than opinions, they appear to believe they can defeat us. The silence that followed this statement was absolute. In 50, no civilization had ever seriously challenged the hegemony once they understood its true power. Most surrendered immediately upon first contact. Those few that resisted were quickly crushed by overwhelming technological and numerical superiority. The concept of a species actively believing they could win was so foreign that several council members required translation clarifications. Grand Hierarch's mind raced through the implications. If humanity truly believed they could challenge the hegemony, and if their technology was as advanced as Commander, data suggested, then the galaxy was facing a potential crisis unlike any in recorded history. Fleet disposition analysis, he commanded. Admiral Ed's cybernetic systems interfaced directly with the hegemony's military networks, pulling real-time data from across their territory. Current total fleet strength, 2.3 million vessels of all classes distributed across 1,847 systems. Mobile reserve, 400,000 vessels. Strategic reserve, 150,000 vessels of capital class or higher. Human fleet strength, estimated at approximately 200 vessels, though this number may be meaningless given their apparent modular technology, the Admiral replied. However, if their defensive installations are any indication, they may be capable of rapid fleet construction using techniques we do not understand. Council member Al, whose species had evolved from hive minds, clicked a complex question. What of their psychological profile? How do they make decisions? What are their weaknesses? All eyes turned to, whose species had evolved as empathic parasites and could understand the mental patterns of almost any sentient race. Her expertise had been crucial in developing strategies for conquering dozens of civilizations. The humans are unique, she began, her mental projections creating visible patterns in the air above her. Most species develop predictable psychological patterns based on their evolutionary history. Pack hunters, hive minds, territorial predators, social herbivores. Each category has exploitable psychological weaknesses. She paused, her empathic sensors reaching out to touch the minds of the council members around her. Humans appear to combine characteristics from multiple evolutionary paths simultaneously. They demonstrate pack loyalty, individual cunning, hive-like coordination when necessary, and predatory aggression, all within the same individuals. More concerning, they seem to view impossible challenges as opportunities rather than deterrents. Explain, the Grand Hierarch commanded. When most species encounter superior force, they surrender, flee, or fight desperately until destroyed, continued. Humans appear to analyze superior force as a problem to be solved. They do not accept the concept of impossible odds, they view them as puzzle parameters. This revelation drew more sounds of distress from the Council. A species that treated seemingly hopeless situations as intellectual challenges rather than reasons for surrender would be nearly impossible to intimidate or demoralize. Strategic recommendations, the Grand Hierarch inquired. Admiral Eth's systems processed thousands of variables in milliseconds. Standard conquest protocols are inadvisable. Recommendation: diplomatic contact to assess true intentions and capabilities before committing to military action. The chamber fell silent again. In 50,000 years, the hegemony had never needed to consider diplomacy with a newly discovered species. Diplomacy was for equals, and the hegemony had no equals. Unacceptable, council member or declared, his crystalline form blazing with indignation. We do not negotiate with primitives. Our reputation throughout the galaxy depends on absolute dominance. Our reputation will matter little if these primitives can actually challenge our fleets, Admiral Eth replied with mechanical logic. Analysis indicates a significant probability that standard conquest protocols would result in unacceptable losses. Grand Hierarch's mind weighed the options. 50,000 years of unquestioned dominance had created certain expectations among both the hegemony's member species and the thousands of civilizations under their control. Any sign of weakness or uncertainty could trigger rebellions across their territory. But Commander's data couldn't be ignored. If humanity possessed even half the capabilities his sensors had recorded, they represented a threat unlike any the hegemony had ever faced. Counterintelligence assessment, he commanded. Probability that this is an elaborate deception. Director's quantum form flickered as she accessed probabilities across multiple dimensional frameworks. Less than 0.3%. The energy signatures and technological demonstrations would require capabilities beyond our own to fake convincingly. Could they be receiving aid from an unknown advanced civilization? Possible but improbable. Our deep space monitoring networks would have detected the movement of technology or personnel required for such assistance. The Grand Hierarch's 6 eyes focused on displays showing the current positions of hegemony fleets throughout the galaxy. Millions of ships, trillions of beings, an empire that spanned thousands of light years and commanded resources that dwarfed most stellar phenomena. Surely this was enough to handle one small world, regardless of how advanced they claimed to be. But doubt gnawed at him. Not doubt about the hegemony's power, but doubt about their assumptions. For 50, they had operated under the belief that technological advancement followed predictable patterns, that civilizations required time and resources to develop capabilities, that experience translated directly to capability. If the humans had somehow bypassed these fundamental rules, then the hegemony might be facing not just a powerful enemy, but an enemy operating by entirely different principles. New intelligence priority, he declared. All surveillance assets will focus on human space. I want to know everything about their capabilities, their intentions, and their methods. Deploy stealth reconnaissance fleets to observe from the maximum possible distance. Grand Hierarch, Director interjected. Our previous surveillance operations may have been detected. If the humans have been observing us as they claimed, they may be aware of our reconnaissance capabilities. The implications of this statement sent another wave of unease through the chamber. If humanity had been studying the hegemony without being detected, then their intelligence capabilities were far more advanced than anyone had suspected. How much did they know about hegemony technology, tactics, and strategic planning? Nevertheless, we require more information, the Grand Hierarch decided. But maintain maximum caution. Do not engage under any circumstances. Observe only. Admiral Eth's cybernetic systems chimed softly. Grand Hierarch, incoming priority transmission from the outer territories. Admiral reports unusual activities in the vegan system. Elaborate. Unknown vessels appearing throughout the system using unidentified translocation technology. They are observing our installations, but have not approached within weapons range. The Grand Hierarch's primary arms clenched reflexively. Description of these vessels. Consistent with human ship designs from Commander's encounter. The chamber erupted again as the implications became clear. Humanity wasn't waiting for the hegemony to make the next move. They were actively surveying hegemony territory, studying their installations and fleet positions. "How many systems?" the Grand Hierarch demanded. Admiral Eth Systems accessed reports streaming in from across the hegemony's territory. 17 confirmed in the past 6 hours. The number appears to be increasing. Director's quantum form pulsed with alarm. "Grand Hierarch, if they can appear anywhere in our territory without detection until they choose to reveal themselves, our defensive strategies may be compromised." The realization hit the Council like a physical blow. The hegemony's power had always rested on their ability to control space, to dictate when and where engagements occurred. If humanity could appear anywhere at will, that fundamental advantage was lost. "Fleet Alert Status 7, the Grand Hierarch commanded. "All vessels will maintain maximum readiness. Install additional sensor nets throughout core systems, and prepare a full diplomatic contact protocol." Council member Or's crystalline structure flared with shock. "You would actually negotiate with them?" "I would learn what we are truly facing," the Grand Hierarch replied, his harmonics carrying the weight of absolute authority. 50,000 years of dominance means nothing if we are too proud to adapt when faced with genuine change. As orders flowed out from the capital to military commands throughout hegemony space, Grand Hierarch remained in the chamber, staring at the holographic displays that showed humanity's impossible achievements. For the first time in his long life, he was beginning to understand what it meant to face an unknown quantity. The humans had demonstrated that they didn't follow the rules that governed every other civilization in the galaxy. They had achieved the impossible through methods no one understood. They had turned the fundamental assumptions of galactic power on their head. But perhaps most disturbing of all, they had done it with what appeared to be casual confidence, as if rewriting the laws of technological development was simply another problem to be solved. The Grand Hierarch's 6 eyes closed as he contemplated a terrifying possibility. What if humanity wasn't just more advanced than they appeared? What if they represented an entirely new category of civilization, one that operated by rules the hegemony couldn't even comprehend? If that were true, then the next move in this unprecedented game would determine not just the fate of the Sol system, but the future of galactic civilization itself. The diplomatic vessel Harmony's voice materialized at the edge of the Sol system with a flash of exotic energy that briefly nearby stars. Unlike the aggressive battle formations that had characterized previous hegemony visits, this ship came alone, broadcasting peace protocols on every known frequency. Its crystalline hull shimmered with patterns that declared peaceful intentions in the visual languages of 100 different species. Grand Hierarch himself had made the unprecedented decision to lead this delegation, abandoning the capital world for the first time in 3 centuries. His presence aboard the ship sent a clear message to both humanity and the rest of the galaxy. The hegemony was taking this encounter more seriously than any in recent memory. Beside him in the observation chamber stood Ambassador Eth, the hegemony's most skilled diplomatic mind, whose species had evolved as natural mediators capable of understanding and bridging vast cultural differences. Her empathic abilities allowed her to sense the emotional undertones of any communication, making her invaluable in negotiations with unknown civilizations. "Initial scan complete, Grand Hierarch," reported Science Officer from his monitoring station. "The defensive installations Commander described are indeed present throughout the system, though many appear to be disguised as asteroids or space debris. The power readings are—" He paused, checking his instruments again. "Beyond our ability to measure accurately." Through the chamber's transparent aluminum windows, the blue-white marble of Earth hung in space like a jewel, seemingly peaceful and unremarkable. But the Grand Hierarch's enhanced vision could make out the subtle distortions in spacetime that indicated the presence of massive defensive structures hidden throughout the system. "Incoming transmission," announced the communications officer. Admiral's face appeared on the main display, but this time she was clearly aboard a different vessel than the one she had used during the previous encounter. The bridge behind her was larger, more sophisticated, and featured technology that seemed to exist in a state of constant flux, as if the very structure was alive and adapting. "Grand Hierarch," she said, inclining her head in a gesture that somehow managed to convey both respect and absolute confidence. "Welcome to the Sol system, We've been expecting you." The Grand Hierarch stepped forward, his harmonics carefully modulated to convey peaceful intentions. "Admiral, I have come to discuss the future relationship between humanity and the galactic hegemony." "Excellent," Admiral replied with that unsettling smile. "We have quite a bit to discuss. However, before we begin formal negotiations, we thought you might appreciate a demonstration of our current capabilities. Consider it an educational exchange." Before the Grand Hierarch could respond, the space around the Harmony's voice began to change. What had appeared to be empty vacuum suddenly filled with structures that materialized as if reality itself was being rewritten. Massive installations, manufacturing complexes, and defensive platforms appeared in precise formations throughout the system. "What you're seeing now is our actual infrastructure," Admiral explained as the holographic displays updated to show the true scope of human construction. "What Commander encountered 3 months ago was essentially our welcoming committee." Science officers' instruments registered energy outputs that comprehension. The installations weren't just large, they were operating at efficiency levels that violated thermodynamic principles. "Grand Hierarch," he whispered, "the power generation capabilities we're detecting would require the controlled output of multiple stellar cores." "We've moved beyond fusion power," Admiral continued, apparently having overheard the comment through sensors that shouldn't have been able to penetrate the Harmony's voice's shielding. "Zero-point energy extraction allowed us to begin serious construction projects, but that was just the beginning." New contacts appeared on the tactical displays vessels that dwarfed anything in the hegemony's fleet, but more disturbing than their size was their apparent construction. These ships seemed to be built from crystallized spacetime itself, their hulls bending light and gravity in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "May I ask how you achieved such rapid technological advancement?" Ambassador Eth inquired, her empathic senses probing for any deception in the humans' responses. Admiral's expression grew thoughtful. "That's actually an interesting story, and it relates directly to why we requested this meeting. You see, when your first scout encountered us 15 years ago, we were indeed as primitive as your reports indicated. But that encounter taught us something crucial about the galaxy we had just entered." She gestured, and new data began flowing to the hegemony vessel. Historical records, technological specifications, and development timelines that painted an incredible picture of human advancement. "We learned that we were alone, outnumbered, and surrounded by civilizations that could destroy us without effort. Most species, we discovered, would accept this situation and either surrender preemptively or hope to avoid attention. But humans have a peculiar psychological trait: we don't handle impossible odds very well." Ambassador Eth's empathic readings detected something unexpected in Admiral's emotional patterns. Not fear or aggression, but a kind of focused intensity that reminded her of predators who had cornered dangerous prey. "When faced with insurmountable challenges," Admiral continued, "humans tend to become extremely creative. We don't accept that something is impossible, we just assume we haven't figured out how to make it possible yet." New holographic displays showed human research facilities that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Scientists working with technologies that required direct manipulation of reality's fundamental structure. Construction projects that treated the laws of physics as suggestions rather than absolute rules. "Our approach to technological development is somewhat different from the galactic norm," Admiral explained. "Most civilizations advance incrementally, building on existing knowledge over. We decided that was too slow." "How did you accelerate the process?" the Grand Hierarch asked, genuinely curious despite his growing unease. "We cheated," Admiral replied with obvious satisfaction. "Instead of trying to understand why the universe works the way it does, we focused on learning how to make it work the way we needed it to. Quantum mechanics, space-time manipulation, zero-point energy, they're not laws to be understood, they're tools to be used." Science officers' readings were becoming increasingly erratic as his instruments struggled to process what they were detecting. "Admiral, our sensors indicate that some of your installations are operating in violations of causality. Effect appears to be preceding cause in several quantum systems." "Temporal engineering," Admiral nodded approvingly. "We discovered that linear time is more of a guideline than a rule. When you're in a hurry to develop new technology, it helps to be able to work backwards from the desired result." The implications of this statement sent chills through everyone aboard the Harmony's voice. Temporal manipulation was theoretical even for the hegemony, requiring energies and mathematical frameworks that existed only in the most advanced research facilities. "You're manipulating time itself?" Ambassador Eth asked, her empathic senses detecting what she interpreted as casual confidence in Admiral's response. "Among other things," the Admiral confirmed. "When you really need to compress several of technological development into 15 years, you use whatever tools are available. Time, space, causality, quantum probability, we've learned to treat them all as variables in engineering equations." Grand Hierarch's mind raced through the implications. If humanity could manipulate time, then conventional military thinking became meaningless. How could you fight an enemy who could undo your victories before they happened? "May I ask what you intend to do with these capabilities?" he inquired carefully. Admiral's smile took on a distinctly predatory quality. "That depends entirely on how this conversation proceeds, Grand Hierarch. You see, we've spent the last 3 months studying the hegemony in considerable detail. Your conquest patterns, your governmental structure, your military doctrines, your economic systems. We've found the analysis quite illuminating." New data flowed to the hegemony ship, but this time it was information about the hegemony itself. Detailed intelligence on fleet positions, political structures, economic vulnerabilities, and strategic resources. Information that should have been impossible for outsiders to obtain. "Our conclusions are somewhat concerning," Admiral continued. "The hegemony's power structure is built on the assumption of technological superiority and the fear it generates. But that assumption appears to be based on 50,000 years of facing civilizations that developed along traditional paths." She paused, allowing the implications to sink in. "We represent something different. We are not a traditional civilization following predictable patterns. We are what happens when a species refuses to accept limitations and decides to rewrite the rules instead of following them." The Grand Hierarch felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. "Are you threatening the hegemony?" "Not yet," Admiral replied with terrifying honesty. "Currently, we're offering you a choice. The first option is to continue operating under the assumption that the hegemony is the dominant force in the galaxy and that other civilizations must submit to your authority. And the second option—" Admiral's expression grew serious. "The second option is to recognize that the galaxy is entering a new phase of development. Humanity is not seeking to replace the hegemony as a galactic empire. We're seeking to establish a new paradigm where civilizations cooperate as equals rather than operating under the dominance hierarchy that has existed for the past 50. Ambassador Eth's empathic readings detected no deception in Admiral's words, but also no flexibility. The human was stating what she clearly believed to be facts rather than negotiating positions. "The hegemony has maintained peace and stability for 50,000 years, the Grand Hierarch pointed out. Why should we abandon a system that has proven successful?" "Because it's about to stop working," Admiral replied bluntly. "Grand Hierarch, you represent a paradigm that assumes technological development follows predictable patterns and that established powers will always maintain their advantages. But we've proven that those assumptions are false." New holographic displays showed projections of technological development rates, comparing traditional advancement curves with humanity's exponential growth patterns. Within 50 years, assuming continued acceleration, human technology will exceed hegemony capabilities by several orders of magnitude. Within a century, we will possess abilities that make your current power seem primitive, and we are not the only species capable of this type of development. The statement hung in the air like a physical presence. If Admiral was correct, then the entire structure of galactic civilization was about to undergo a fundamental transformation. "What evidence do you have that other species are capable of similar advancement?" Ambassador Eth asked. "Because we're teaching them," Admiral replied with calm confidence. "Over the past 3 months, we've made contact with 47 civilizations that were conquered or absorbed by the hegemony over the past several. We've been sharing our technological development techniques with any species interested in learning them." The Grand Hierarch's 6 eyes widened in shock. 47 civilizations. If humanity was spreading their impossible technologies to other species, then the balance of galactic power was already shifting beyond any possible control. "You've been inciting rebellion throughout our territory," he said, his harmonics taking on dangerous undertones. "We've been offering education," Admiral corrected. "Whether or not those civilizations choose to use that education to challenge hegemony authority is entirely up to them. But you should know that 17 of them have already achieved zero-point energy extraction, 12 have developed space-time manipulation capabilities, and 3 have successfully tested temporal engineering." The implications were staggering. If even a fraction of the hegemony's subject civilizations achieved advanced human technologies, the Empire's military advantages would evaporate almost overnight. "What do you want from us?" the Grand Hierarch asked, finally abandoning any pretense of negotiating from a position of strength. Admiral leaned back in her command chair, her expression becoming almost sympathetic. "We want the hegemony to evolve, become a force for technological advancement and cooperation instead of conquest and domination. Use your organizational capabilities to help accelerate the development of every civilization in the galaxy." "And if we refuse?" Admiral's smile returned, but this time it carried an edge that made the Grand Hierarch's exoskeleton tingle with primal warnings. "Then you become irrelevant. Grand Hierarch, the galaxy is changing whether you participate in that change or not. The only question is whether the hegemony evolves into something new and valuable, or whether it gets left behind by civilizations that have moved beyond the need for empire-based power structures." She gestured again, and new data appeared showing human colonies spreading throughout previously unexplored regions of space, each one serving as a center for technological development and education. "We're not waiting for permission to reshape galactic civilization, Grand Hierarch. We're simply offering you the opportunity to be part of that process instead of an obstacle to it." The Grand Hierarch stared at the displays showing humanity's expanding influence, their impossible technologies, and their growing network of allied civilizations. In 50,000 years, no one had ever spoken to the hegemony with such casual confidence about reshaping the entire galaxy. But perhaps most disturbing of all, Admiral's projections appeared to be entirely achievable. If humanity could continue their exponential technological advancement while spreading their techniques to other species, then the traditional power structures that had dominated the galaxy would indeed become obsolete. "What would you need from the hegemony?" he asked finally. "Access to your organizational networks, your communication systems, and your vast accumulated knowledge about galactic civilizations," Admiral replied immediately. "In exchange, we offer full access to our technological development techniques and partnership in the creation of a new galactic civilization based on cooperation rather than domination." The offer was unprecedented. In 50,000 years, no one had ever proposed partnership with the hegemony. Everyone else had either surrendered or been destroyed. "I will need to consult with the High Council," the Grand Hierarch said carefully. "Of course," Admiral agreed. "But Grand Hierarch, I should mention that this offer has a time limit. Every day that passes sees more civilizations achieving advanced capabilities and becoming less dependent on the hegemony's protection or authority. Eventually, the offer of partnership will become unnecessary." "How long do we have?" Admiral's expression grew thoughtful. "Our projections suggest that within 2 years, the balance of galactic power will have shifted enough that the hegemony's consent will no longer be required for the transformation we're planning. We're offering partnership now because we believe the transition will be smoother with your cooperation than without it." The Grand Hierarch nodded slowly, understanding the implicit message. Humanity wasn't asking for permission to change the galaxy, they were informing the hegemony that the change was inevitable and offering them a chance to participate. As the Harmony's voice prepared to return to hegemony space carrying news that would shake the very foundations of galactic civilization, Grand Hierarch found himself contemplating a future that violated every assumption he had held about how the universe worked. But perhaps, he thought as he watched human ships casually manipulating space-time around them, it was time for the hegemony to learn that the universe was far stranger and more wonderful than 50,000 years of dominance had led them to believe. The age of empire was ending. The age of cooperation was about to begin. And humanity, the civilization that everyone had dismissed as primitive just months before, was leading the way into a future that promised to be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The only question now was whether the hegemony would choose to be part of that future, or whether they would cling to the past until it became irrelevant. As Admiral had said, the galaxy was changing whether they participated or not. The choice was simply whether to evolve or be left behind. And as the Grand Hierarch contemplated the impossible technologies surrounding his ship and the casual confidence with which humanity discussed reshaping galactic civilization, he began to suspect that evolution might be their only option for survival.